Fixing leaky rock shaft bearing or seals. Well, there's no way around it. If you've got a category 1, 2 type 3-point hitch on a 1750 and larger, you've got to pull a PTO unit out in order to do this repair. That's probably harder work than actually the actual repair, but there are 2 shafts, one on each side. Some of you might want to do this if you've broken. Sometimes that'll happen. 3-point hitch arm comes unhooked, things swing around, it breaks this horseshoe shaped thing here where the lower link hooks in. You get your PTO unit out, which is covered in a couple of my other videos. I'll put tags up there to links to those. Once you've got the PTO unit out, there's just 4 bolts that hold these 2 shafts in, 3/4 inch heads, and then there's washers that engage into the shaft itself. So these washers have to come out. What I do is one side at a time, and then that way like if I do the right side first, the left side of the shaft is holding this bracket in place. It's hooked to the spring there, which gives resistance, and that's how the draft control works. When you get in a heavy load, your 3-point hitch arms start pulling against this, and so it will start turning against that spring in there. And then as it does, like this is a 1855, so the linkage is on the outside. On an 1850, some of those, the linkage actually goes through the pan up in there, which I'm glad they moved it to the outside, because there's a seal there where the rod goes up through the pan, and that can leak and let your hydraulic oil down. 1755, 1855 in them, they moved it to the outside, so no seal to leak. But as that shaft moves, this arm moves back and forth, which is hooked into the linkage inside the top there for your 3-point hitch, and makes it lift or lower depending on the load. So anyways, this is hooked into that, so just to keep it in place, do one side, then do the other. So take all 4 bolts out, and then I'll drive a chisel down in here just a little bit, and that just kind of spreads the clamp open just a little. That makes the washers real easy to pick out of there. And then you can just slide the shaft right on out the outside. I'm not going to do it on this one because it's not leaking, and I'm not looking for extra work at this point. But once that is out, the shaft is slid all the way out. The seal is right there. That's easy enough to pull out and drive a new one in. So not too tough of a repair. But I did want to go over, almost knocked my head. The bearings in there. There are needle bearings in there. And generally you will find that they are somewhat worn because they are submerged in oil, but any of the grit and stuff kind of gets in there and stays in there. And just years and years of rubbing back and forth. Usually the cage has failed, and so all the needles come falling out of the bearing. If you want to save a few bucks, you can just pack grease in around the needles and try to put them back in there. But I've found if you do a little looking online, you can usually find some bearings for 20 bucks or so, and to me it's worth it to put the new bearings in, because if the old ones are worn very much and the shaft ain't sitting in the center of the seal, then the seal is not effective, and you'll still have leaking. So for all the work, to me it's worth the 20 bucks a bearing or so. Usually the seals don't look bad. Could be dirt got in there and ground on them, but usually just after so many years that rubber on the seals gets hard and it just doesn't do its job anymore. So this is one I had on hand. You can see it's in the white box. There's the original part number for the bearing, 104565A. And then over here is one I got off from eBay, and it is a McGill GR36-N. And as you can see, it is identical to the one I got from White. Pretty sure McGill was their supplier on this. But I did some cross-referencing and come up with a Torrington bearing, the HJ364824. And it has the same specs. I like the cage a lot better on it. That keeps, there's fewer needles, but it's rated for as much weight as the McGill version and load and everything. So there's no reason it shouldn't work. Same width, same diameter, same shaft hole. And doing some looking online. This is the one I found online for about 20 bucks. You go to Agco and I think they're somewhere up around 100 bucks a piece now. And so between those numbers, you ought to be able to come up with something and just replace those bearings while you're at it and have it done right so that that shaft sits in the center of the seal and the seal can do its proper job. See, I don't have the seals on hand right here, but I will add the part numbers for the seals into this video. Right there. There is a snap ring that retains that bearing inside of there. It can be a little bit of a bear. It's not an I type. It's just one you got to pick away with screwdrivers or something. The seal is straightforward. That pops out. Take that snap ring out. The bearing is a slide-in fit, so it's not anything that's real hard to remove. And slide the old one out and put the new one in. Put the snap ring back in. Put your seal in, slide your shaft in, and then I'll do the other side, slide it apart. Process is exactly the same for the other side. Slide it back in, put your, don't forget to put your washers back in, and torque your bolts, and that is done. Pretty simple fix other than getting to it. And while we're here, if you're ever pulling an axle and wonder what you have to do, pulling a PTO is probably the easiest way, but there is a snap ring on the inside of the axle shaft here to keep the bull gear from wandering around. You got to take that snap ring off, then your bolts on the outside of the axle just come off and the whole axle comes out as an assembly. So if have an axle bearing out or something like that, you do have to get in here to get that snap ring off. Pretty easy fix other than just the labor, especially if you can get online and find those bearings cheap enough. I did want to mention, if you have the external lift cylinder type of 3-point hitch, then the process is actually a little bit easier. You want to drain your oil, but you don't have to pull the PTO unit. I will go out and get video on a different tractor. But there is a nut. You have to relieve the pressure off the leaf springs. There is a nut on the end of the, I believe it's the right side, and this anchor is just splined onto the shaft. You get that anchor out, and then the whole shaft just slides out the other side. And so no need to pull the PTO on that one because it's a simpler. All your springs are on the outside, so it doesn't need all this stuff on here. Okay, right there. That's the nut you have to take off. And then this horseshoe yoke thing slides off from that assembly. But before you do, you have to, leaf springs are preloaded with pressure. That bolt right up there, you gotta loosen that up. And I believe there's one on the other side. Yeah, it comes out of the axle housing down onto it. Measure the length of those, because if you don't get them back with the amount of right of preload, it affects how your 3-point hitch will work. But once you got it, you just slide the whole shaft out of this side, and your bearings and seals are in there. Put it back together, readjust your bolts back to where they were, and you are in business. And depending on where your wheels are set, there is a possibility that shaft could hit your wheels depending on the diameter of them, so you might want to do some measuring because it's as long as it takes to get through, so it's got to come out that far too. When it gets out towards the end, there's some wiggle room, but something to take into consideration is you might have to remove a wheel to get it off this side. I did this one, did not have to remove the wheels. 38-inch wheels, and they're set out halfway decent, so that gave me enough room to get it out and get it back in. And I think that covers this repair. Put your PTO back in, which is covered in the PTO video. I had a link for before, and you're good to go. Hope this helps, and thanks for watching.